The conference room fell dead silent as I slammed my resignation letter on the mahogany table, right in front of Patricia and her precious son Tyler. "You want an apology?" I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Here's my resignation instead." Patricia's face went white as she realized what I'd just done in front of the entire marketing team and 3 major clients. Tyler's smug grin vanished when he saw the stack of printed emails I pulled from my folder. Everyone was about to learn the truth about who really deserved to be fired. "My name is Dahlia, and I'm 26 years old. 8 months ago, I thought I'd landed my dream job at Sterling & Associates, one of Denver's most prestigious advertising agencies. Fresh out of my MBA program at the University of Colorado, I was thrilled to join their marketing team as a specialist, focused on retail campaigns. The sleek downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains felt like the perfect place to launch my career. During my first week, I met Tyler Morrison, the 24-year-old junior account manager who seemed to have everything handed to him. Tall, confident, and always impeccably dressed in designer suits, Tyler carried himself like he owned the place. What I didn't immediately realize was that his mother, Patricia Morrison, was the senior director of marketing strategy and had been with the company for 15 years. From our very first team meeting, Tyler's attitude toward me was dismissive. When I suggested incorporating social media analytics into our campaign strategies, he interrupted me mid-sentence. "That's interesting, Dahlia, but we prefer to stick with proven methods here," he said with a condescending smile. The other team members exchanged glances, but nobody spoke up. I tried to build relationships with my colleagues. Sarah, the graphic designer, was friendly and talented, always willing to collaborate on visual concepts. Marcus, the senior account executive, had 10 years of experience and seemed genuinely knowledgeable about client relationships. Jennifer, our project coordinator, kept everything running smoothly with her meticulous attention to detail. They all seemed nice enough, but I noticed they became quieter whenever Tyler was around. Over the next few weeks, Tyler's undermining became more obvious. During brainstorming sessions, he would take my ideas and rephrase them as his own suggestions. Building off what Dahlia mentioned, he'd say, "I think we should consider a multi-platform approach." Then he'd present essentially my exact concept while making it sound like his original thinking. Even more frustrating, Tyler had a habit of forgetting to include me in important client calls. I'd arrive at the office to discover that meetings I was supposed to attend had already happened. "Oh, didn't you get my email?" Tyler would ask innocently. The client wanted to move the call earlier. "Don't worry, I'll catch you up later." But he never did. The other team members seemed uncomfortable with Tyler's behavior, but nobody said anything directly. I started to suspect that Tyler's position wasn't based on merit. He often made basic mistakes about industry terminology and seemed confused by standard marketing practices that any junior manager should understand. My suspicions were confirmed during my first major presentation opportunity. Westfield Department Stores was looking for a new agency to handle their back-to-school campaign worth nearly $200,000. I'd spent weeks preparing a comprehensive strategy that included demographic analysis, creative concepts, and a detailed media placement plan. The presentation was scheduled for 10:30 on a Tuesday morning in our main conference room. I arrived early, set up my laptop, and reviewed my notes one final time. When the Westfield team arrived, I felt confident and ready to showcase our agency's capabilities. But Tyler had other plans. From the moment I began speaking, he interrupted me constantly. "Let me clarify that point for you," he'd say, then proceed to contradict or diminish what I'd just explained. When I presented the demographic data I'd compiled, Tyler jumped in with, "Those numbers are interesting, but I think we need to dig deeper into the psychographic profiles." The most damaging moment came when I was explaining our creative concepts. Tyler suddenly stood up and addressed the client directly. "I want to be transparent with you," he said seriously. "Dahlia is still learning the ropes here. While her ideas show promise, I'll be supervising her work closely to ensure everything meets our quality standards." I felt my face burn with embarrassment. The lead client, A stern woman named Mrs. Patterson looked at me with newfound skepticism. "Mr. Morrison," she said, turning to Tyler, "perhaps you should be our primary point of contact for this campaign. We appreciate honesty, and we want to work with someone who has the experience to deliver results." Tyler's smile was victorious. "Absolutely, Mrs. Patterson. I'll make sure this campaign exceeds your expectations." By the end of the meeting, I'd essentially been demoted from lead on my own presentation. Tyler walked the clients to the elevator while I sat alone in the conference room, staring at my carefully prepared materials. All my research, all my strategic thinking, had been dismissed because Tyler had undermined my credibility in front of the people who mattered most. That afternoon, I sat in my cubicle trying to process what had happened. I'd never experienced anything like this in school or during my internships. The professional world, it seemed, operated by different rules than I'd expected. As I watched Tyler celebrate with Patricia in her corner office, their heads close together as they reviewed what I assumed were the Westfield contracts, I realized I was facing something much bigger than simple workplace competition. This was the moment I understood that merit and hard work weren't going to be enough. Tyler had advantages I couldn't compete with, and he wasn't afraid to use them. The question was whether I'd let him destroy my career before it even began, or find a way to fight back. 3 weeks after the Westfield incident, Tyler's behavior shifted from dismissive to openly aggressive. What had started as subtle undermining evolved into systematic harassment that made my daily work life increasingly unbearable. Tyler began inserting himself into every aspect of my job. He declared that all my work needed to be reviewed before going to clients, creating unnecessary delays and bureaucracy that didn't apply to anyone else on the team. When I'd spend hours perfecting a campaign proposal, Tyler would sit on it for days before returning it with minimal changes and condescending notes like needs more strategic thinking or reconsider target audience. The public humiliation became routine. During our weekly team meetings, Tyler would interrupt my updates to question my expertise in front of everyone. "Are you sure those metrics are accurate, Dahlia?" he'd ask with feigned concern. "That seems inconsistent with industry standards." He'd never specify what standards he was referencing, but the implication was clear. I didn't know what I was talking about. Marcus and Sarah started giving me sympathetic looks during these meetings, but nobody challenged Tyler directly. Jennifer would take detailed notes and avoid eye contact whenever Tyler went after me. I began to dread Tuesdays, knowing I'd have to endure another session of professional degradation. The breaking point came during a brainstorming session for a major grocery chain campaign. Mountain Fresh Markets was looking to rebrand their organic produce line, and I'd conducted extensive market research on consumer preferences for sustainable products. I'd identified key demographic segments and developed messaging strategies that connected environmental consciousness with family health. As I presented my research to the team, Tyler's expression grew increasingly dismissive. When I finished explaining the data trends, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "This is completely useless," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Dahlia, you're overthinking this. Maybe you should stick to basic tasks until you understand how real marketing works." The room went silent. Sarah's pencil stopped moving across her sketch pad. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Jennifer stared at her laptop screen like it contained the secrets of the universe, and I felt something break inside me. "Excuse me?" I managed to say, my voice barely steady. Tyler continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Mountain Fresh doesn't need complicated research. They need simple, clear messaging that actually connects with customers. This academic approach isn't practical for real-world applications." I excused myself and walked to the bathroom on shaking legs. Once inside a stall, I broke down completely. The months of constant criticism, the undermining, the public humiliation, it all crashed over me at once. I cried until my eyes were red and my makeup was ruined, then sat there trying to figure out how my dream job had become such a nightmare. When I finally returned to my desk, I decided I needed to start protecting myself. I began documenting everything, saving emails in a separate folder, recording detailed notes after every meeting, taking screenshots of Tyler's messages before he could delete or modify them. If this was going to continue, I wanted evidence of what was happening. My investigation revealed Tyler's campaign against me was more extensive than I'd realized. He'd been bad-mouthing me to other departments, telling people in accounting that I was difficult to work with, and informing the creative team that my strategic guidance was unreliable. When I ran into Amanda from the public relations department at the coffee shop downstairs, she mentioned that Tyler had warned her about my attitude problems. He said, "You've been struggling with the transition from academic work to practical applications," Amanda told me, stirring her latte. "But honestly, Dahlia, you seem fine to me. Actually, you seem more prepared than most new hires we get." I thanked Amanda and returned to my desk with a growing understanding of how systematically Tyler was working to damage my reputation throughout the company. This wasn't random harassment. It was a calculated effort to isolate me and make me appear incompetent to anyone who might otherwise support me. That evening, I stayed late to catch up on work that Tyler's review process had delayed. The office was mostly empty except for the cleaning crew. As I was gathering my things around 8:30, I heard voices coming from the conference room near the elevator. I recognized Tyler's voice immediately, but he wasn't alone. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked quietly toward the conference room. Through the partially open door, I could see Tyler talking to Jennifer, who looked uncomfortable and kept glancing toward the hallway. "She's not going to last much longer," Tyler was saying confidently. "Mom's already started questioning her judgment after the Westfield situation. A few more mistakes and she'll be gone." Jennifer shifted in her seat. "Tyler, I don't think this is right. Dahlia works really hard and her ideas are actually pretty good. Maybe you should give her a chance to succeed instead of constantly criticizing her." Tyler's laugh was cold. "Jennifer, you don't understand how this business works. There are limited opportunities here, and I can't have someone taking credit for work that should be mine. My mother has put a lot on the line to get me this position, and I'm not going to let some graduate school know-it-all mess that up." My heart was pounding as I listened to Tyler basically admit that he was sabotaging me deliberately, but Jennifer's next words made my blood run cold. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Jennifer said quietly. "I remember what happened to Rachel and Emma. They both left within 6 months, and they were both talented people." Tyler shrugged. "They weren't a good fit for the company culture. Sometimes people need to learn that this industry isn't for everyone." I backed away from the door carefully, my mind racing. Tyler had done this before. Other women had been driven out of the company by the same systematic harassment I was experiencing. And Patricia, his mother, was not only aware of what was happening but actively supporting it. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I realized I was facing a choice. I could accept that this was how things worked and try to survive until I found another job, or I could fight back against people who clearly had no intention of treating me fairly. The next morning, I arrived at work with a new sense of purpose. Tyler and Patricia thought they could intimidate me into leaving quietly. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Understanding Patricia Morrison's role in Tyler's behavior required me to pay closer attention to the family dynamics that shaped our workplace. Patricia was a formidable presence at Sterling & Associates, a 15-year veteran who'd built her reputation on successful retail campaigns and client relationships. She was divorced, and Tyler was her only child, which explained the fierce protectiveness that I was beginning to recognize. During my first few months, I'd barely interacted with Patricia directly. She worked primarily with senior-level accounts and spent most of her time in client meetings or strategic planning sessions. When we did cross paths in the hallway or break room, she was polite but distant, offering brief nods or professional smiles that never reached her eyes. I started noticing the stark contrast between Patricia's warmth with other employees and her coolness toward me. When she talked with Marcus about his accounts, her whole demeanor changed. She'd laugh at his jokes, ask about his family, and discuss campaign strategies with genuine engagement. With Sarah, she was encouraging and supportive, often praising the creative work and suggesting opportunities for professional development. But with me, every interaction felt like I was being evaluated and found wanting. Patricia would listen to my updates with a neutral expression that bordered on skepticism. Her responses were always professionally appropriate, but lacked any personal connection or encouragement. "That's an interesting approach, Dahlia," she'd say in a tone that suggested it wasn't interesting at all. The pattern became more obvious when Patricia started assigning me projects that seemed designed to set me up for failure. While Marcus and other team members received accounts with reasonable timelines and clear objectives, my assignments came with impossible deadlines and constantly changing requirements. The pharmaceutical campaign was the perfect example. Patricia called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon and explained that Meridian Pharmaceuticals needed a complete rebranding strategy for their new arthritis medication. The timeline was aggressive: full creative concepts, market analysis, media strategy, and regulatory compliance review, all due in 2 weeks. "This is a significant opportunity, Dahlia," Patricia said, her tone suggesting this was a privilege rather than an unrealistic demand. "Meridian is considering expanding their relationship with our agency, so the quality of this work will be closely scrutinized. I'm confident you can handle the challenge." I knew immediately that 2 weeks was insufficient for a pharmaceutical campaign. The regulatory compliance alone typically required 3 to 4 weeks of review with legal consultants. But Patricia presented it as a test of my capabilities, and I couldn't refuse without appearing incompetent or unwilling to take on important work. I threw myself into the project with desperate determination. I worked until 10 or 11 every night, researching FDA guidelines, analyzing competitor campaigns, and developing creative concepts that balanced medical accuracy with consumer appeal. I skipped lunches, canceled weekend plans, and pushed my body to its limits trying to meet Patricia's impossible deadline. What I didn't realize was that Patricia was actively sabotaging my efforts. 3 days into the project, she changed the target demographic from adults over 50 to adults over 65, requiring me to completely redo my market research. A week later, she decided the campaign needed to focus on quality of life improvements rather than pain management, forcing me to revise all my messaging strategies. Each change came with the same explanation: "The client has provided new guidance that requires some adjustments to our approach." But when I asked to speak directly with the Meridian team to clarify their requirements, Patricia insisted that all client communication go through her to maintain consistency. I was working 80-hour weeks, surviving on coffee and determination, when I accidentally discovered the truth. I'd arrived at the office at 6:30 in the morning to finish the regulatory compliance review, and the building was mostly empty except for maintenance staff and a few early arriving executives. As I walked past the conference room near Patricia's office, I heard familiar voices through the thin walls. Patricia and Tyler were already there, which seemed strange, since official office hours didn't begin until 8:30. I slowed my pace and listened carefully. Tyler was talking about the Meridian campaign, but he was discussing details that I hadn't shared with anyone yet. Specific creative concepts, market segmentation strategies, regulatory concerns that I'd identified in my research. "The arthritis angle is perfect," Tyler was saying. "When the client sees how poorly she handles the complexity, we'll have everything we need to justify moving the account to someone more experienced." Patricia's voice was crisp and businesslike. The deadline pressure should be enough to compromise the quality of her work. If she produces something substandard, Meridian will lose confidence in her abilities, and we can transition the account to you without any questions from senior management. My hands were shaking as I realized what I was hearing. Patricia wasn't giving me challenging assignments to test my abilities. She was deliberately setting me up to fail. The changing requirements, the impossible timeline, the refusal to let me communicate with the client directly, it was all part of a calculated plan to destroy my credibility. "What if she actually manages to pull something together?" Tyler asked. Patricia's laugh was cold. "Then we'll find other problems. The presentation skills, the strategic thinking, the client relationship management. There are plenty of ways to demonstrate that she's not ready for this level of responsibility." I backed away from the conference room carefully, my heart pounding. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. Patricia Morrison, the senior director I'd hoped to impress and learn from, was actively working to sabotage my career, and she was doing it to protect her son's position, regardless of merit or fairness. That morning, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, the pharmaceutical campaign materials scattered around me like evidence of my naive belief that hard work would be rewarded. I'd been operating under the assumption that Patricia was a professional who would evaluate my work fairly. Instead, she was Tyler's co-conspirator in a scheme that had apparently been used against other women before me. The scope of their collaboration was breathtaking. Patricia had access to senior-level information, client relationships, and company resources that made her harassment far more dangerous than Tyler's amateur attempts. She could manipulate assignments, control client access, and influence how my work was perceived by others in the company. But understanding their strategy also revealed their weakness. They were so confident in their ability to control the narrative that they weren't being careful about covering their tracks. Patricia's morning meetings with Tyler, the timing of project changes, the patterns of sabotage, all of it could be documented and analyzed. I spent the rest of that day working on the Meridian campaign, but I also started building a more comprehensive record of everything Patricia and Tyler were doing. If they wanted to play games with my career, they were about to learn that I was keeping score. The automotive account assignment came 3 weeks after I'd submitted the pharmaceutical campaign, which Patricia had predictably found lacking in strategic depth despite my comprehensive research and analysis. She suggested I needed to develop better instincts for complex client relationships and assign me to what she described as a simpler project that would be more appropriate for my current skill level. Manchester Luxury Automobiles was looking for an agency to handle their spring sales campaign. They specialized in high-end European vehicles and catered to affluent professionals in the Denver metropolitan area. This was actually perfect for me. I'd completed a summer internship at a luxury automotive marketing firm during my MBA program and felt confident about the industry dynamics and target demographics. I threw myself into the Manchester project with renewed enthusiasm. I conducted thorough research on local luxury car buyers, analyzed competitor campaigns, and developed what I believed was genuinely innovative, creative strategy. The campaign concept focused on everyday luxury positioning that connected high-end automotive features with real-life benefits that busy professionals would appreciate. My market analysis identified 3 key demographic segments: established executives looking for status symbols, younger professionals seeking reliable luxury, and empty nesters ready to indulge in premium experiences. For each segment, I developed targeted messaging strategies that emphasized different aspects of the Manchester brand experience. The creative concepts were sophisticated but accessible. Instead of typical luxury car advertising that focused on abstract lifestyle imagery, my campaign showcased specific moments when Manchester vehicles enhanced daily experiences, the quiet comfort during stressful commutes, the advanced safety features that protected families, the prestige that accompanied career achievements. I spent 2 weeks perfecting every detail: comprehensive budget projections, media placement strategies that maximized exposure to target demographics, and presentation materials that clearly explained the strategic thinking behind every recommendation. This felt like the project that would finally demonstrate my capabilities and silence Tyler's constant criticism. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Manchester's marketing director, Catherine Walsh, would attend along with their regional sales manager and advertising coordinator. Patricia and Tyler would also be present, which made me nervous, but I felt confident that my thorough preparation would speak for itself. Wednesday evening, I stayed late to review my presentation one final time. I wanted to ensure every slide was perfect, every transition smooth, every data point accurate. The office was nearly empty when I finally saved my files and prepared to leave around 9:30. Thursday morning, I arrived early to set up the conference room and review my notes. At 10:15, 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, I opened my laptop to do a final check of the presentation files. What I saw made my stomach drop. The demographic data had been changed. Where my research showed that 62% of luxury car buyers in our target area were between 35 and 50 years old, the slides now showed 87% were over 65. The budget projections had been altered to recommend spending 70% of the media budget on print newspapers and radio, with minimal digital advertising allocation. Most damaging, the creative concepts had been modified to include inappropriate imagery suggestions, a slide recommending attractive female models in revealing clothing to appeal to male buyers, and messaging that emphasized masculine power and dominance rather than the sophisticated lifestyle positioning I'd developed. I frantically checked the file timestamps and modification history. The changes had been made at 11:47 the previous night, hours after I'd left the office. Someone with access to my computer had deliberately sabotaged my presentation, and I had less than 10 minutes before the client arrived. I tried desperately to fix the most obviously problematic content, changing the demographic data back to accurate percentages and removing the inappropriate creative suggestions. But I couldn't address all the sabotage in time, and my frantic editing made me appear unprofessional and unprepared when Catherine Walsh and her team arrived. The presentation was a disaster. When I presented the corrected demographic data, it contradicted the budget allocation slides I hadn't been able to fix. The media strategy appeared inconsistent and poorly researched. Catherine Walsh interrupted me repeatedly to question discrepancies in my recommendations. "Miss Jackson," Catherine said, during my explanation of the target audience analysis, "these numbers don't align with industry standards for luxury automotive marketing. Are you certain about your research methodology?" I stumbled through an explanation about last-minute revisions, but it only made me sound more unprofessional. Tyler watched with barely concealed satisfaction as I struggled to reconcile the sabotaged elements of my presentation with the accurate information I was trying to convey. The meeting ended badly. Catherine Walsh collected her materials with obvious disappointment. "We'll need some time to evaluate your proposal," she said diplomatically. "The strategic inconsistencies concern us, and we want to ensure we're working with an agency that can deliver cohesive, professional campaigns." After the Manchester team left, Patricia turned to me with an expression of professional disappointment that felt rehearsed. "Dahlia, this was extremely concerning. Our clients expect consistency and attention to detail. These kinds of errors reflect poorly on the entire agency." She proceeded to critique my presentation in front of the assembled team, pointing out every discrepancy that the sabotage had created. Tyler nodded gravely throughout her comments, occasionally adding observations about the importance of thorough quality control and double-checking all materials before client meetings. "I think we need to discuss your project management processes," Patricia concluded. "This level of disorganization suggests some fundamental issues with how you approach complex assignments." I wanted to scream that someone had deliberately destroyed my work, but I had no proof of who had accessed my computer or when the changes had been made. Accusing Tyler or Patricia without evidence would only make me appear paranoid and unprofessional. That evening, I stayed at the office until almost midnight, determined to understand what had happened. I accessed the computer system logs and traced the file modifications back to their source. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Tyler had accessed my computer files at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, using administrator credentials that should not have been available to junior staff members. But more damning was what I found in my email trash folder. Messages that Tyler had sent to Catherine Walsh and her team 3 hours before our meeting. The emails positioned Tyler as the responsible agency representative who was concerned about potential problems with the campaign presentation. He'd warned Manchester about possible inconsistencies in the strategic recommendations and suggested they might want to request a revised proposal from someone with more automotive industry experience. Tyler had sabotaged my presentation and then positioned himself as the solution to the problems he'd created. And based on Patricia's immediate availability to criticize my work and suggest alternative arrangements, she'd been part of the plan from the beginning. I printed every piece of evidence I could find: the computer access logs, the deleted emails, the timeline of file modifications, and Tyler's communications with the Manchester team. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to make sure I had documentation of exactly how dirty they were willing to get. The question now was what to do with the evidence. I could try to explain the situation to senior management, but Tyler and Patricia had 15 years of company relationships and credibility that I couldn't match. or I could wait for them to make another move and be ready with proof when they did. As I finally left the office that night, I realized that Tyler and Patricia had made a critical mistake. They were so confident in their ability to manipulate the situation that they'd left a clear trail of evidence. Now I just needed to decide how to use it. I spent the weekend creating a comprehensive case file that documented every incident of harassment and sabotage I'd experienced over the past 8 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Tyler's computer access logs, deleted emails to clients, recorded instances of public humiliation, Patricia's impossible project assignments, and the pattern of systematic undermining that had driven other women out of the company. By Sunday night, I had 43 pages of documentation organized chronologically with supporting evidence for every claim. Screenshots, email printouts, meeting notes, and file modification records painted a clear picture of deliberate harassment designed to destroy my career. Monday morning, I requested a meeting with Patricia and Tyler to discuss the Manchester situation and identify ways to improve future client presentations. I knew they would interpret this as an admission of fault and an opportunity to document my supposed incompetence for senior management. Patricia agreed to schedule the meeting for Tuesday at 10:30 in the main conference room. "I think it would be valuable to have other team members present," she said with false concern. "This could be a learning opportunity for everyone about proper project management and quality control." I agreed immediately, knowing that witnesses would be crucial for what I had planned. Marcus, Sarah, and Jennifer were asked to attend along with Patricia and Tyler. The setting was perfect, a formal meeting with multiple witnesses where I could present my evidence systematically. Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather for early October. I dressed carefully in my best Navy business suit and arrived at the office 30 minutes early to prepare for what I knew would be the most important meeting of my career. At 10:30 sharp, we gathered in the conference room. Patricia sat at the head of the table with Tyler to her right, their body language suggesting complete confidence in their ability to control the narrative. Marcus, Sarah, and Jennifer took seats along the sides of the table, their expressions indicating they expected another session of professional criticism directed at me. I set my folder on the table but didn't open it immediately. Instead, I began by acknowledging the Manchester presentation problems and expressing my commitment to understanding what went wrong. "I appreciate everyone taking time for this discussion," I said calmly. "The Manchester presentation certainly didn't meet our usual standards, and I think it's important to examine not just what happened, but why it happened." Patricia nodded approvingly. "I'm glad you recognize the seriousness of the situation, Dahlia. Professional accountability is essential in client relationships." I opened my folder and removed the first set of documents, the computer access logs showing Tyler's unauthorized access to my files the night before the presentation. "I agree completely," I said, distributing copies of the logs to everyone at the table, which is why I spent the weekend investigating exactly how the Manchester presentation became so problematic. Patricia's expression shifted slightly as she examined the computer records. Tyler leaned forward to look at his mother's copy, and I watched his face go pale as he realized what he was seeing. "These logs show that my presentation files were accessed and modified at 11:47 p.m. the night before the Manchester meeting," I continued methodically. "The modifications included changing accurate demographic data to completely false information, altering budget recommendations to emphasize outdated media channels, and adding inappropriate creative suggestions that I would never include in a professional presentation." Jennifer looked confused as she studied the documents. Marcus frowned and asked, "Who has access to modify files like this?" "That's an excellent question," I replied, removing the next set of evidence. "These records show that the modifications were made using Tyler's administrator credentials." Tyler's face flushed red. "That's impossible," he said quickly. "I was nowhere near the office that late. Someone must have used my login information without authorization." I distributed the next documents, Tyler's deleted emails to the Manchester team. These are messages that Tyler sent to Catherine Walsh and her colleagues 3 hours before our presentation. He warned them about potential problems with my strategic recommendations and positioned himself as the more experienced alternative for their account. The room was completely silent as everyone read Tyler's emails. The messages were professionally worded, but clearly designed to undermine confidence in my work before the meeting even began. "Tyler," Patricia said slowly, "did you send these messages to the Manchester team?" "I was trying to protect the agency's reputation," Tyler said defensively. "I had concerns about Dahlia's experience level, and I thought the client should be aware of potential issues." "Based on what?" I asked directly. "You hadn't seen my presentation materials when you sent these emails. The only way you could have known about problems was if you created them yourself." Tyler's composure cracked completely. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. "You've been struggling since day one, making mistake after mistake. Someone needed to make sure our clients weren't affected by your incompetence." "What mistakes?" I pressed. "Be specific." "The Westfield presentation, the pharmaceutical campaign, constantly questioning established procedures," Tyler said, his voice getting louder. "You act like you know everything, but you're just a recent graduate with no real-world experience." "I'm a recent graduate who consistently produces thorough, professional work that you systematically sabotage," I replied calmly. "And I have documentation of every incident." I distributed the remaining evidence, records of Tyler's interruptions during team meetings, examples of his unauthorized changes to my project assignments, screenshots of the condescending feedback he'd provided on work that met all specified requirements, and documentation of his campaign to damage my reputation with other departments. Patricia had been reviewing the evidence in silence, her face growing increasingly pale. When she looked up, her professional mask had completely slipped. "These allegations are very serious, Dahlia," she said carefully. "But making accusations against a colleague requires substantial proof, and workplace conflicts can often be resolved through better communication rather than formal complaints." "You're right," I agreed. "Which is why I also documented your role in creating impossible project deadlines, changing requirements without client authorization, and coordinating with Tyler to ensure my failure on every major assignment." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. "That's completely inappropriate. I have 15 years of experience with this company, and I would never engage in the kind of unprofessional behavior you're suggesting." "Then how do you explain your morning meetings with Tyler where you plan strategies to undermine my work?" I asked. "I have detailed notes from conversations I overheard outside the conference room, including your discussion about using the Meridian campaign to demonstrate my supposed incompetence." Tyler exploded. "You were eavesdropping on private conversations? That's unethical and probably illegal." "What's unethical is systematically harassing a colleague while your mother provides you with inside information and administrative access to sabotage her work," I replied. The confrontation escalated quickly from there. Tyler accused me of being paranoid and making excuses for poor performance. I calmly presented additional evidence while he became increasingly agitated. Patricia tried to regain control by questioning my documentation methods and suggesting that workplace misunderstandings were being blown out of proportion. "You're nothing but a useless, pathetic excuse for a professional," Tyler finally shouted, confirming everything I'd accused him of in front of 3 witnesses. Patricia realized immediately that Tyler had destroyed any remaining credibility they might have had. She turned to me with cold fury and made the statement that sealed both their fates. "I will not tolerate you disrespecting my son any longer," she declared. "You're off all current projects, effective immediately. I expect a formal written apology for these accusations by end of business today, or we'll have no choice but to terminate your employment for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment." I looked around the table at Marcus, Sarah, and Jennifer, all of whom appeared shocked by what they'd witnessed. Then I reached into my folder and pulled out the resignation letter I'd prepared the night before. "Here's my response to your demand for an apology," I said, placing the letter on the table in front of Patricia. "I resign, effective immediately. And I think everyone in this room now understands exactly why." The resignation letter hit the mahogany table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent conference room. Patricia stared at the white envelope with my typed notice inside, her face cycling through shock, anger, and something that might have been fear as she realized what I'd just done. "You can't be serious," she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Dahlia, you're making a mistake that will follow you throughout your career. No agency will want to hire someone who abandons their responsibilities during a difficult situation." I pulled the thick folder of evidence closer and opened it to the final section I hadn't yet shared. "The only mistake I made was waiting this long to expose what you and Tyler have been doing." At that moment, the conference room door opened and 3 people entered. Catherine Walsh, from Manchester Luxury Automobiles, along with David Chen, from Westfield Department Stores, and Rebecca Martinez, from Mountain Fresh Markets. They'd been scheduled for a separate meeting with senior management, but the timing of their arrival was perfect. "I hope we're not interrupting," Catherine said, noticing the tension in the room. "We were told to come here for our quarterly review meeting with the marketing team." Patricia looked panicked. Having 3 major clients witness her personal crisis with a subordinate was a nightmare scenario that could destroy her carefully maintained professional reputation. "This is actually perfect timing," I said, standing up and addressing the clients directly. "I was just sharing some information about project management practices that have affected the quality of work on your accounts." I removed the comprehensive evidence file I'd prepared specifically for this moment. Detailed documentation showing how Tyler's sabotage had compromised multiple client campaigns, how Patricia had manipulated project timelines to create failure scenarios, and how their systematic harassment had driven away talented employees who could have contributed to client success. "What you experienced during the Manchester presentation wasn't incompetence," I explained to Catherine. "It was deliberate sabotage designed to make me appear unprofessional so that Tyler could position himself as the more qualified account manager." I showed the clients Tyler's unauthorized access logs, his pre-meeting emails that undermined confidence in my work, and the timeline of systematic interference that had affected their campaigns. Catherine examined the evidence with growing alarm, while David and Rebecca exchanged concerned glances. "Are you saying that someone in your agency deliberately compromised our advertising campaign?" David asked, his voice sharp with professional outrage. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "And I have documentation proving that this pattern of sabotage has affected multiple client relationships over the past 8 months." Tyler couldn't contain himself any longer. "She's lying!" he shouted, his face red with anger and desperation. "This is all fabricated because she can't handle constructive criticism. She's been incompetent since day one, and now she's trying to blame everyone else for her failures." His outburst only confirmed everything I'd been explaining to the clients. Catherine looked disgusted. "Mr. Morrison, are you saying that you consider it appropriate to shout at colleagues in front of clients? And are you denying that you sent unauthorized communications about our account?" "I was trying to protect your interests," Tyler said desperately. "She was going to ruin your campaign, so I had to intervene to make sure you received quality service. By sabotaging the presentation materials and then positioning yourself as the solution," Rebecca interjected. "That's not protecting our interests. That's manipulating our business relationships for personal gain." Patricia tried to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. "There seems to be some confusion about internal procedures," she said with forced calm. "I'm sure we can clarify any misunderstandings and ensure that all client relationships are handled appropriately going forward. The only confusion is why this behavior was allowed to continue for 8 months, Catherine replied coldly. "Miss Johnson, you said you were resigning. Do you have other evidence we should be aware of before we decide whether to continue our relationship with this agency?" I opened the folder to the final section, Jennifer's corroborating testimony. "Actually, I'm not the only one with information about these practices." All eyes turned to Jennifer, who had been sitting silently throughout the confrontation. She looked terrified, but determined as she spoke. "I've been documenting Tyler's harassment for months," she said quietly. "Not just with Dahlia, but with the 2 women who left the company before her. Rachel and Emma both experienced the same pattern of sabotage and public humiliation until they couldn't take it anymore and found jobs elsewhere." Jennifer pulled out her own folder, smaller than mine but equally damaging. I have emails where Tyler bragged about managing out women who threatened his position. I have records of Patricia providing him with confidential information about project assignments, and I have documentation of their morning strategy meetings where they planned ways to undermine female colleagues. The revelation that Jennifer had been secretly documenting the harassment pattern for months changed everything. Her evidence corroborated my accusations and proved that Tyler and Patricia's behavior represented a systematic campaign against multiple employees. Marcus found his voice for the first time during the meeting. I suspected something was wrong, he said slowly. The way Rachel left so suddenly, and Emma seemed so defeated during her last few weeks. But I didn't realize it was deliberate harassment. Sarah nodded vigorously. Tyler made inappropriate comments about female colleagues all the time. He said women were too emotional for strategic work and that diversity hiring was lowering the quality of the team. I thought it was just talk, but this proves he was acting on those beliefs. The clients were horrified as they realized the scope of the harassment they'd unknowingly been part of. Catherine was the first to speak. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she said, her voice sharp with professional anger. "Manchester Luxury Automobiles will be terminating our contract with Sterling & Associates immediately. We cannot work with an agency that allows this kind of behavior to compromise client relationships." David and Rebecca quickly followed suit, expressing outrage at having their campaigns affected by internal harassment and promising to review their contracts immediately. Patricia made one last desperate attempt to control the situation. "These are serious allegations that require proper investigation through company channels. I don't think it's appropriate to make business decisions based on employee disputes that may involve personal grievances rather than professional issues." Tyler, however, was beyond rational response. Faced with the complete collapse of his career prospects and the exposure of everything he'd done, he lashed out with pure venom. "You're all making a huge mistake," he snarled at the clients. "Dahlia is a manipulative, incompetent fraud who's been failing since day one. She seduced other employees into supporting her lies because she can't handle honest feedback about her pathetic performance. You'll regret believing her sob story when you see what kind of work she actually produces." The room fell completely silent. Tyler's misogynistic rant had just confirmed every accusation of harassment and demonstrated exactly the kind of toxic behavior that had created the entire situation. Catherine stood up slowly, her expression one of complete professional disgust. "Mr. Morrison, in 30 years of business relationships, I have never witnessed such unprofessional, inappropriate behavior. The fact that you feel comfortable expressing those views in front of clients and colleagues explains everything about why this situation developed." She turned to Patricia with cold finality. "Miss Morrison, your son has just demonstrated that he is completely unfit for any professional environment. The fact that you've been enabling and protecting this behavior makes you equally culpable. Manchester will be ending all business relationships with Sterling & Associates effective immediately." As the clients gathered their materials and prepared to leave, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. 8 months of systematic harassment had finally been exposed, and the people responsible were facing the consequences of their actions. Tyler and Patricia sat in stunned silence as the full scope of their professional destruction became clear. But for me, walking out of that conference room with my resignation letters submitted and my integrity intact, it felt like the beginning of something much better than what I was leaving behind. The aftermath of my resignation meeting unfolded faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within 2 hours of the clients leaving our conference room, Catherine Walsh, David Chen, and Rebecca Martinez had each contacted Sterling & Associates senior management to express their concerns about Tyler's behavior and demand immediate action regarding their account relationships. By 4:30 that afternoon, CEO Jonathan Sterling and HR Director Amanda Foster were conducting emergency meetings with everyone who had witnessed Tyler's outburst and reviewing the comprehensive evidence that Jennifer and I had provided. The documentation was overwhelming. 8 months of systematic harassment, deliberate sabotage of client relationships, and a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had driven away multiple female employees. The company's response was swift and decisive. Tyler was terminated immediately for harassment, sabotage, and conduct detrimental to client relationships. Security escorted him from the building that same evening, and his access to all company systems was permanently revoked. Patricia's situation was more complex due to her senior position and long tenure with the company, but the evidence of her active participation in Tyler's harassment campaign made her position untenable. She was demoted from senior director to associate account manager and transferred to the smallest satellite office in Colorado Springs, effectively ending her influence over major accounts and personnel decisions. The ripple effects throughout Sterling and Associates were immediate and positive. Jonathan Sterling called an all-hands meeting the following Monday to announce new anti-nepotism policies that prohibited family members from working in the same department or reporting structure. The company also implemented mandatory harassment prevention training and established an anonymous reporting system for workplace misconduct. For me, the vindication felt surreal after months of questioning my own professional judgment and abilities. Jonathan Sterling personally called me at home 3 days after my resignation to offer not just my position back, but a promotion to senior marketing specialist. With a 20% salary increase and direct reporting to the CEO, rather than through Patricia's former department structure. The offer was tempting, but I'd already decided on a different path. Catherine Walsh had contacted me the day after the resignation meeting with an unexpected opportunity that felt like perfect justice for everything I'd endured. "Dahlia," Catherine said when she called, "Manchester Luxury Automobiles was genuinely impressed with the strategic thinking in your original presentation materials. We'd like to offer you a position as our Director of Marketing Strategy, with full authority over campaign development and a team of your own to manage." The irony was beautiful. The client that Tyler had tried to steal from me was offering me a better position than I'd ever had at Sterling and Associates, with more responsibility, higher compensation, and the chance to build marketing strategies without interference from people who saw me as a threat rather than an asset. I accepted Manchester's offer immediately and started my new position 2 weeks later. The transition was smooth and exciting, with Catherine providing the kind of mentorship and professional support that I'd hoped to find at Sterling and Associates but never experienced. 2 months into my new role, I heard through industry contacts that Tyler had been unable to find another position in Denver's marketing community. Word had spread quickly about his behavior and termination, effectively ending his career in an industry where professional reputation is everything. He'd moved back in with Patricia in Colorado Springs, and both of them had largely disappeared from the professional circles where they'd once held influence. More importantly, I learned that Sterling and Associates had quietly reached out to Rachel and Emma, the 2 women who'd been driven out by Tyler's previous harassment campaigns. Both were offered positions with the new management structure and protections that would prevent them from experiencing the treatment they'd endured before. Rachel accepted and returned as a senior account manager with guaranteed reporting directly to senior management rather than through department directors who might have personal agendas. Emma declined but expressed appreciation for the acknowledgement of what she'd experienced and the changes the company was making to prevent future harassment. The Manchester Luxury Automobiles campaigns I developed in my new role exceeded every performance metric we'd established. Our spring sales event generated record-breaking revenue, and the client relationships I'd built led to expanded contracts with other automotive brands in their corporate family. Catherine became not just my supervisor, but a genuine mentor who helped me understand how to navigate corporate politics without compromising my principles. 6 months after leaving Sterling and Associates, I was featured in Denver Business Journal's Rising Stars and Marketing article, highlighting my innovative approach to luxury brand positioning and my rapid career advancement despite early professional challenges. The article mentioned my previous experience at Sterling and Associates only briefly, noting my transition to Manchester as an example of how talent recognition can lead to unexpected opportunities. But the most satisfying moment came during a Denver Marketing Association networking event where I encountered Patricia for the first time since my resignation. She approached me hesitantly, looking older and more uncertain than I remembered. "Dahlia," she said quietly, I wanted to apologize for how things developed at Sterling and Associates. I realize now that I let my protective instincts toward Tyler cloud my professional judgment. I looked at her carefully, remembering the systematic harassment she'd orchestrated and the career damage she'd attempted to inflict. Patricia, what you and Tyler did wasn't protective parenting. It was deliberate harassment that hurt multiple people and damaged client relationships. I hope you've learned from the consequences. She nodded uncomfortably and moved away. But the exchange felt like final closure on a chapter of my life that had tested everything I believed about fairness, persistence, and professional integrity. Standing in that networking event, surrounded by colleagues who respected my work and accomplishments, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from 8 months of systematic harassment and professional sabotage. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires risking everything you think you want in order to find what you actually deserve. The most important thing I learned was that documenting harassment and finding allies willing to speak up are crucial for protecting yourself and others in toxic work environments. Jennifer's courage in corroborating my evidence and Marcus and Sarah's willingness to acknowledge what they'd witnessed made the difference between my word against established employees and a clear pattern of misconduct that couldn't be ignored. I also learned that companies with strong leadership will take decisive action when presented with clear evidence of harassment, especially when client relationships are affected. But employees have to be willing to gather that evidence and present it professionally, even when the personal cost feels overwhelming. Have you ever found yourself in a workplace situation where you had to choose between accepting unfair treatment or risking your career to fight back? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? And what allies helped you through the process? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story about fighting back against workplace harassment and finding the strength to demand the professional respect I deserved. If this resonated with your own experiences, please hit the like button to let me know it was helpful. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming workplace challenges, and share this with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves. Remember, you deserve to work in an environment where your contributions are valued and your dignity is respected. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.